The murderous anti-Semitic attack on the Manchester Synagogue last Thursday marks a new low for our country. The incident, of course, was heinous in itself. During worship, on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, Jihad al-Shami, a Syrian-born British citizen who was on police bail for alleged rape, attacked the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue. Adrian Dalby and Melvin Kravitz were killed. This horrific anti-Semitic terrorist attack has exposed two very ugly realities about the once great nation of Britain. The first ugly truth is that Britain has imported its anti-Semitism. Lord Glassman wrote in the Times this weekend, "It is a meaningful and significant rupture in our national story because violence is being established between different communities. In Manchester, a Muslim killed a Jew. That is the truth. This has never happened before. Since the readmission of the Jews to England in the 1650s, thank you Oliver Cromwell, until 1960, when a Jewish student was killed by fascists, not a single Jew was killed in our country for being a Jew. This is unique in all Europe and the Americas. In a 300-year period of pogroms, mass slaughter, chemical genocide, and industrial murder, this is a source of amazing pride to me." Now, I am not saying that we don't have a problem of anti-Semitism from the far left. Only this Saturday, reporting on the Trafalgar Square pro-Palestine protests, Times journalist and friend of the show Matthew Said wrote, "The motivation for being here was obvious, potent and implacable. The hatred of Jews. I heard conspiracy theories that October 7th was a false flag operation, blood libels, and the pervasive view that the Manchester atrocity was not a heinous attack, but righteous comeuppance for an evil people. Nor am I saying we don't have an anti-Semitism problem today from the far right. I myself have experienced anti-Semitism from both those quarters. The ugly truth is that a large part of Britain's Muslim community, which immigrated to Britain from 1948 onwards, have an anti-Semitism problem. Not all, but a startling amount. A 2024 poll by the Henry Jackson Society found that only 24% of British Muslims believe Hamas committed murder and rape on October 7, 2023. 46% of British Muslims showed sympathy with Hamas. 46% believe Jews have too much power over UK government policy. Now, there was a pretty big clue to this problem when we witnessed British Muslims celebrating on the streets of London immediately after the October 7th attack. Celebrations outside the Israel embassy, where flares went up, shouts of Allah Akbar resounded, and some even got on their knees towards Mecca in prayer. Of course, this open hatred was quite clear before 2023. 2021 was the record year for anti-Semitism in the UK. Openly, on the streets of London, we saw incidents like this in 2021.
Stop all of them! Stop their mothers, stop their daughters, and show them support for Palestine. Shut them up, rape their daughters. If you have to send a message like that.
None of the men in that video were charged. But of course, since 2023, things have got worse. Friend of the show, Ayan Hirsi Ali, wrote this in the Free Press. Across the UK, the calls to slaughter were not whispered, but shouted. In Oldham, an imam at the Medina Masjid prayed to Allah to, quote, rid us of the Jews, and called Jews brothers of the monkeys and apes. In Northampton, an imam at a mosque minutes from the local synagogue prayed openly for Jews to be destroyed. In Blackburn, the head of a religious school that teaches nearly 1,000 children praised martyrdom and urged Muslims to take up arms just days after the October 7 attacks. In June of this year, in Cardiff, a mosque shared a propaganda video glorifying Hamas fighters descending from the sky on paragliders. A few weeks later in Oxford, another mosque was formally warned for spreading disgusting and divisive content. These are not slips but signals. They are proof of open Jew hatred, of butchers being glorified, of open calls for blood. There are some British Muslims who are brave enough to call this out. Friend of the show Rajamia is one of them. What we face in the United Kingdom is more than a prejudice against Jews. It is the expansion of radical Islam. This is the elephant in the room, and it is why, if I were Jewish, I would already be asking myself whether the UK is still a safe home, he tweeted. This danger is compounded by numbers. Britain's Muslim population has grown rapidly, both through high birth rates and through the large-scale exploitation of the asylum system. What began as fringe is now entrenched, and the demographic momentum means that, unless confronted, this ideology will not diminish, but expand its reach across every sphere of national life. Raja is right. The Manchester terrorist Jihad al-Shami, who was born in Syria, was an Islamist. Anti-Semitism was not his ideology. Fundamentalist Islam was. Anti-Semitism is but a tenet of that ideology. Now, as with the pogrom of October 7th, when people immediately took to the streets to celebrate in London and across the West, it is the reaction to the October 2nd terrorist attack in Manchester which is perhaps just as troubling for what it revealed about our country, which brings me to the second revelation. Britain has an elite class who are either too cowardly or are in total denial about our Islamist problem. There is, of course, the media. In a now deleted tweet, popular establishment podcast The Newsagents wrote, "Why the Yom Kippur Synagogue attack in Manchester will be exploited by the right wing to sow division in the UK." To which Konstantin Kisin responded, "A man called Jihad has gone on a murder spree on a synagogue, and two respected, neutral and balanced recent BBC stalwarts would like you to believe the problem is right-wing journalists. You really, really, really don't hate the media enough." The newsagents, perhaps not aware of the famous Norm Macdonald joke, "What terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims." These BBC journalists seem to make their report about neo-Nazis.
Just briefly, you mentioned the far right. Obviously, there's just been an increased temperature in political language, hasn't there, in recent days and weeks, and everyone will be very mindful of the backdrop to what we're seeing today at the moment.
Yes, I mean, I have to say that the increase in language that we've seen recently linked to the far right hasn't been particularly Jewish focused, and in fact some people on the hard right in the UK are quite closely aligned with some Jewish groups, but there are still neo-Nazi groups operating in the UK who definitely have an anti-Semitic mindset. So to a degree, people on the hard right, the far right, are a bit divided on their attitude to the Jewish community.
Meanwhile, BBC Verify published this video emphasising how the father of the killer distanced himself from the attack.
Friday morning, in a statement on Facebook, his father condemned the attack on behalf of the family and called it a heinous act which targeted peaceful, innocent civilians. He also said they distanced themselves from the attack.
What they omitted is that Jihad's father, Faraj, had praised the October 7th Hamas terrorist as Allah's men on earth on Facebook. Jihad's father, a trauma surgeon, said that the Hamas terrorists proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Israel would be destroyed eventually. BBC Verify, set up to tackle online disinformation, were themselves spreading disinformation by omission. But it's not just the media. So too our political class. Former Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf claimed the terrorist actions had, quote, nothing to do with Islam. Unfortunately for Humza, some of us have read the Quran and the Hadith, and we know it had everything to do with Islam. Irritating as Hamza might be, he no longer has power. The Labour Party, on the other hand, do. One of their MPs, Hamish Faulkner, thought it would be a good time to announce, the day after the attack, a second cohort of students from Gaza with scholarships at British universities arrived in the UK today to begin their studies. What could possibly go wrong? But most craven, gutless and contemptible of all is our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Starmer has shown no problem in labelling countless regular Brits as far-right, be they Southport protesters,
far-right thuggery,
or those of us concerned about the Pakistani rape gangs.
the poison of the far right.
But the Prime Minister, in his various broadcasts since October 2nd, have still not named the ideological inspiration for Jihad al-Shami. He cannot bring himself to say the word Islamism. Coward that he is, he even sent David Lammy, his deputy, to face the heckles at the Manchester attack vigil.
I ask them to reflect with all human dignity, grace and understanding.
You've allowed it to go on for years on campus. Empty words. Empty words. It's all empty words. We demand action. Our synagogues were shut down.
People are angry at the Prime Minister, not least for rewarding Hamas with recognition of a Palestinian state, an action celebrated by Hamas as fruits of October 7.
اليوم ليش كل الدول اعطيني بس اقول لك مثل ليش كل الدول اصبحت تعترف بفلسطين الان؟ قبل 7 اكتوبر
هل في دولة تجرأت على أن تعترف بدولة فلسطين؟ أعطيني بس مثال. الآن حصاد 7 أكتوبر هو الذي خلى كل العالم يفتح عيونه على القضية الفلسطينية.
But if our Prime Minister hasn't got the courage to name the problem, radical Islam, how are we supposed to believe he'll be able to deal with it? Even the UAE have called us out for not taking Islamism seriously enough.
There will come a day that we will see far more radical extremists and terrorists coming out of Europe because of the lack of decision-making, trying to be politically correct, or assuming that they know the Middle East and they know Islam and they know the others far better than we do. And I'm sorry, but that's pure ignorance.
But just to emphasize how serious the problem, which must not be named, is, the 2 fatalities at the Manchester Synagogue were the 95th and 96th lives lost on British soil in 19 Islamist attacks since 2005. That's not to mention the thousands of foiled attacks, as friend of the show Rafe Haidel Manku explains.
Actually linking the terror activities, all the major terror activities, or most of them that we can name, and as you have named, including Sir David Amess and so forth, are linked to our asylum and our immigration system. And it's not surprising, of course, especially if you're an asylum seeker who's come here. The children, just because you're born here or you came here at a young age, doesn't mean that you're going to escape the trauma and the violence that your parents may have experienced in terms of your upbringing. Then we know that they're more prone to violence and to terrorist activities than you would find from the native homegrown population.
As with Britain's anti-Semitism problem, our Islamist problem is one we have imported. The overwhelming majority of the Islamists in these attacks were foreign-born or foreign heritage. Now, if you've been paying attention, nothing here has been a revelation. All of this has been known for some time. What is revealing, though, is how little has changed. How little has changed in the last 20 years. How little has changed since the 2017 Manchester Arena terrorist attack. Back then, we were told not to look back in anger, to let love triumph over hate. Then, as now, Britain has failed to identify its real problems. Britain faces difficult choices ahead. The deportation of our 39,000 jihadis, and that's according to MI5 by the way, should not be controversial. Even Muslims should support this, because even Muslims are victims of Islamist attacks, as was the case in February 2016 when Imam Jalal Uddin was brutally murdered in a children's playground in Rochdale by the 2 ISIS supporters Mohammed Qadir and Mohammed Saidi. I've said it already, but it bears repeating, I am not describing all British Muslims. Many have condemned the Manchester attack, and we should commend their bravery. But what next for Britain? Well, which other nations have successfully managed this kind of multiculturalism? Perhaps Singapore comes to mind, with 15% Muslim population, a long-standing Jewish community, but 0 successful anti-Semitic attacks, and their Islamist attacks have been foiled. But Singapore is not a liberal country. For us to choose the Singaporean path would be to give up on the principles of liberty, free speech, free association. The rather more grim example is Lebanon. The once majority Christian nation has become a deeply anti-Semitic failed state, with separate Christian, Sunni and Shia enclaves all at odds with each other and on the verge of a second civil war. If that sounds ridiculous to imagine here in Britain, well, consider that on Saturday night in Peacehaven, East Sussex, there was an arson attack on a community mosque. The blame for this terrible crime is, of course, first and foremost on the perpetrators. But it is the case that if our leaders fail to deal with or even name our nation's problems, the extremist elements of our society may think to lash out. And that is something nobody wants. Whatever path Britain takes, there are some basics we have not tried yet. Real law and order, enforcing borders, prescribing the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, for example. But there is something else, and rather more fundamental than all of that. And that is talking about the problem honestly, identifying it accurately. If you can't name a problem, you can't solve it. In this case, it's Islamism. Elie Wiesel once said, "Anti-Semitism is a disease of the soul, a cancer that eats away at the moral fabric of any society that tolerates it. For too long, Britain has been tolerating that which will not tolerate Britain." And to end this video, I just want to wish my deepest condolences to all those affected by Manchester's horrific attack, and thank you for watching.